What is up, Knicks fans? Welcome back to yet another episode of Fireside Knicks with your hosts, Dylan and Ryan. And today, we're going to talk about the two free agents that the Knicks have signed over the past 24 hours. First, Jordan Clarkson, and then earlier today, Guerschon Yabusele from Philadelphia. Those are two very good free agent signings, if you ask me. I think they are definitely some players that are good to be off the bench for us because, we needed bench depth badly. We didn't have any sort of bench depth whatsoever last season. I think those two guys are really going to help the bench significantly. But first, we're going to talk about Jordan Clarkson. And Ryan, I'm going to pass it off to you. When you heard about the Jordan Clarkson signing, they signed him for the league minimum, first off, I should mention, which I personally think is a steal for a guy who averaged 16 a game last year. But I want to get your input on that.
Yeah, so the first thought I had when it was announced that the New York Knicks got Jordan Clarkson on the veteran minimum is, as you mentioned, what a steal. I mean, they signed Campaign last year to the same kind of contract, and not to disparage Campaign because, we don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's a bad guy or anything like that. Haven't heard anything negative about him as a person, but he's not Jordan Clarkson. And Jordan Clarkson also, look, he isn't a superstar. This isn't the best player in the NBA, but as you mentioned, someone who can shoot high volume and score on high volume. Is he an elite three-point shooter? No. Is he a bad defender? Yes, but again, it's a step up over what you had in Campaign. He can handle the rock. He can handle the basketball. He can be the guy who you can have as your sixth man if you keep the starting five from last year intact, which, we could go back and forth on whether that should be the case or not, maybe in a different video. But I personally view this as an opportunity for the New York Knicks to have real scoring depth off the bench. It's something they have not had in years past, and we'll talk about this with Yabusele as well when we get into that. The New York Knicks feel like they've turned one of their biggest weaknesses into a strength. A bench that I'd usually go, not a strength at all for this team, probably their biggest weakness. It now becomes one of their bigger strengths because when you have him on the court, you're going to have a shot creator. You're going to have someone who can generate points, generate offense, and he generates a ton of gravity as well. His playmaking talent is really good as well. He ranks, I believe, in the 89th percentile in playmaking talent. His off-ball gravity is pretty strong for someone who isn't a great shooter. So, again, I really love this addition, and for very, very cheap. I mean, it's $2.3 million according to Spot Track. I don't know how accurate that number is going to be. Maybe as we get more details, we'll get a more accurate number. But, Dylan, it's a very cheap contract, and regardless of what that exact number is, it's an insignificant amount of money for a player who could be a significant part of your bench depth and your rotation in 2025.
Yeah, and as you were saying too, I mean, I'm personally not even the biggest fan of Jordan Clarkson's game. I'll admit it. I think I think he has bad shot IQ. I don't like the defense and all that stuff. Me and my brother have jokingly said he's a righty Campaign, even though I do think Jordan Clarkson is miles better than Cameron Payne. It's just a joke I like to make because of the shot selection that Jordan Clarkson has. And I think we've all seen the infamous video of Mike Breen ripping him apart when we played them earlier this year. So, we know how he is. But what I will say is Clarkson being on this bench is a significant upgrade over what we already had there because the Knicks, as you mentioned, they didn't have any scoring off the bench whatsoever. They were dead last in bench points per game last season, and they were also the only team in the NBA to not have 2,000 total bench points. So they didn't get any scoring out of their bench whatsoever last season, and now you just added Jordan Clarkson, who, in fact, since 2020, has the most points out of all bench players since that season. He's got like over 4,500 points in total off the bench since that season, which is top in the NBA by quite a large margin. And, he also won the Sixth Man of the Year award back in 2021. I know he's not the same player as he was back then when he was, winning that award and stuff like that, but he's still a talented scorer. He's a guy who can shoot the three at a good rate. He's a guy who's willing to take shots too, which I think is extremely important because, I felt like the Knicks had too many guys last season that weren't willing to take shots. Obviously, you could look at Tom Thibodeau and say maybe he was the reason why that was the case, but either way, the Knicks didn't have guys that were willing to just be on the floor and just let that ball fly, right? Jordan Clarkson is someone who will let it fly. And as a matter of fact, too, I like his shot creation a little bit. I know I criticize his shot selection and his shot IQ, but I do like the fact that he's at least able to create off the bounce and, look for his own shot instead of having to rely off the ball. But he is also someone who can play off the ball. You can kind of play him in a variety of ways, and I think that's what really will benefit the Knicks big time because now they have a good scorer. You know what I mean? Like, you have a talented starting five that scores enough, right? And you have Brunson and Towns who get all the points. nights, but you needed someone to come in the game off the bench and provide a spark. You didn't really feel like the Knicks kind of had that for most of the last year. You felt like the guy that would come in the game and provide that spark off the bench was always kind of interchanging. You felt like one game it might have been Deuce McBride, and then the next game McBride might be having a stinker, so then it's like Campaign's having a solid night, or Shamit. You want to have someone consistently come in the game off the bench and provide you an impact almost every time, right? And I think Jordan Clarkson is someone who will fit that model. I think he will be able to come in the game and consistently provide an impact. He's also willing to, he's willing to play with physicality and some energy. I know his defense sucks, right? But who knows? Maybe him playing on a much better team in a much better situation will motivate him a little bit to try harder on that end of the floor. I mean, when we signed Shamit is not known to be a good defender whatsoever, at least he wasn't when he came here. And then when he came here, he actually was providing a solid impact on that end of the floor. So who knows? Maybe you can get something out of Jordan Clarkson with that. But even aside from the defense, the scoring is what was needed to be added. You badly needed to get some scoring off the bench because you just did not have any. You know what I mean? It was a really, really hard watching like McBride, Payne, and Shamit try to generate offense off the bench together. I really was not a fan of that. And again, I know I said I'm not the biggest fan of Jordan Clarkson's game, but considering they signed him for the minimum, I really can't find a reason for me to actually be upset about it. You know what I mean? I would be a little more upset if it took off like $5 million or something like that, or if it ended up, hard capping them to be able to make another move, which today they signed Yabusele, who we're about to get into. If it prevented him from making a move like that, then yeah, I would have been a little upset about that. I wouldn't have been very pleased, but I can't be upset about the league minimum, especially for a guy who averaged 16.4 points per game last year. You might get that same production again, considering that he's now the main scorer off the bench. So that's really where I stand on that, but I want to move on to the next free agent, as I just alluded to. Gershon Yabusele, who was with the Philadelphia 76ers last season. He came back in the NBA after a few years away from the league. He had that great run during the Paris Olympics, which is kind of what convinced him to come back to the NBA, and he played well for Philly last year, and now he is a member of the New York Knicks. Earlier today, he signed a 2-year, $12 million contract. Now, what I should point out is that contract does put them near the second apron, so in order for them to be able to make a move that is not a veteran minimum, they will have to trade someone, which we'll probably get into at some point, whether it's this video or a separate video as to what that move should be, if they want to do that, or if they should just stop right here and run with this roster. We'll figure that stuff out as time goes on, but I do want to talk about Yabusele in the short term right here. Ryan, first off, when you heard about the signing, right, what was your initial reaction to it? I personally think this is a good signing. I wanted Yabusele last summer, and I wanted him at the trade deadline. I'm glad that they were able to get him. I think he's going to provide a lot of stability in the second unit, but what do you think about all that?
Yeah, so Yabusele is someone who is going to also provide a lot of offense. Now, is he a great defender? No, but with someone at his size and considering the role he played in Philadelphia, he is someone who I believe can become even better with the New York Knicks. He primarily played as a center with Philadelphia, and while he is capable of playing the position, he is 6'8", so he's going to be very limited, and he's going to get exposed in those kinds of matchups, especially considering that the Sixers rarely had a player you would even consider throwing on a center against someone while Yabusele was on the court. Now, a couple of the things that I found really valuable about Yabusele's skill set is he ranked in the 80th percentile in catch-and-shoot three-point percentage this past season. I think that's very valuable. He also does a very good job at the rim. He's in the 84th percentile in rim field goal percentage. So when you look at some of the most efficient shots in the game, three-pointers or catch-and-shoot three-pointers, and you have shots at the rim, you want to convert those into points. And oftentimes it felt like the easy shots or the shots you should have in the playoffs didn't convert into shots for the Knicks. They couldn't find that reliable catch-and-shoot guy, that guy they can just dump the ball off to and hope that player can pull up and generate a bucket, generate a big point, or generate a big score. And those have a big effects on momentum and the way that the game kind of swings. If you can stymie Indiana up 15 points with a three-pointer, that comeback they had in game one, it doesn't really happen, right? One three-pointer here, one two-pointer there. You're that away from maybe being in the finals this year and seeing how Oklahoma City played throughout the postseason. They had a lot of clunkers. I originally thought that I wouldn't feel too bad about losing in the ECF because of the way that the Oklahoma City Thunder had played in the Western Conference Finals. But if anything, their performance in the postseason and looking back on it, the Knicks could have had a shot to win the finals, and that will hurt me for a very long time. And Yabusele, he's not the reason why you didn't go to the finals, and he's not going to be the sole reason why you get there. But as I mentioned earlier in the show, your biggest weakness going into the 2025-24 season is now one of your biggest strengths. You have 9 players you can go to in a playoff rotation. The New York Knicks can use Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, Miles McBride, Jordan Clarkson, Gershon Yabusele, and Mitchell Robinson, all in their rotation. All of these guys can provide quality minutes. All of them can play a role. And when you have 9 players like that, you can use these players in the roles that best fit them. You know Clarkson's not a good defender. You wouldn't put Clarkson out there, up 3 in the final possession of a game. But you would put Clarkson out there instead of Josh Hart maybe if you were down 10 points with 5 minutes to play. Or maybe you put Yabusele and his shooting out there. Maybe you feel comfortable with your bench unit now. You can have someone like Yabusele and someone like Clarkson galvanizing your offense while your big guys are on the bench. You can run small ball lineups with Yabusele out there. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't love it. That wouldn't be my go-to. But if you have to do it, you can do it. And I kind of compare what the Knicks had to what they have now. Cam Payne is what Jordan Clarkson is basically replacing.
What's up, guys? We are recording this portion of the episode the next day because we had some technical difficulties, but we're going to continue on the conversation that we were having about Gershon Yabusele. You know, the last thing Ryan mentioned was the enhanced roster depth, and I really think that the signing of Yabusele and Clarkson, those 2 guys in particular, it really enhances the depth because the Knicks last season, they didn't have any bench depth whatsoever. I mean, we all know how bad the scoring was off the bench last season. Like I mentioned before, dead last in bench points. They were also the only team in the NBA with less than 2,000 bench points. When you add a guy like Yabusele, a guy who can shoot, a guy who can score in all different parts of the court, a guy who's physical, he's 6'8", 260 pounds. This is a unit, right? You adding a guy who can do pretty much a lot of different things for you, and he can play a lot of different roles. He can play at the 4. He can even play a little bit at the 3. Ideally, you don't want him to, but he could. And you can also play him at the 5 as a backup center. Now, I know he's a little undersized to get a ton of minutes at center, but he's also played the position long enough to kind of have experience at that position, so it's not really like out of his lane for him or anything like that. But really what I think, you know, when you add a guy like him, you're adding, not only are you adding a guy who can score in many different ways, but like I said, he can play so many different roles, and that's what I think is really important for the Knicks bench because they didn't really have guys that could do a lot of things. I mean, you had some guys that could score a little bit, like Deuce McBride could score off the catch and shoot, but he couldn't really do anything else other than like decent perimeter defense. Cameron Payne as well, another guy who kind of was just like, you know, a solid playmaker, solid shot creator, but, you know, we all know how wicked his shot selection was, so, you know, it was a very on and off time with Cameron Payne, and then Landry Shamet when he was on the bench, I mean, he didn't really play enough for my liking, at least. I mean, Tom Thibodeau, I think, did not play the guy enough. But whenever he did play, you know, he'd provide a spark. He'd make some cool shots. He'd play physical defense, and he'd be active on that end of the floor. That was always nice to have. But when you have Yabusele, a younger guy, a guy who's active in so many different ways, and as I've been saying, is very versatile, that is a huge signing, and I think they got him for a pretty good bargain, too. They only signed him for 2 years, $12 million. Now, yes, obviously, like I've said before, it does put the Knicks at the second apron, so they're going to end up needing to possibly, I want to emphasize that, possibly have to make a trade if they want to be able to add more in free agency this summer. Because right now, where it stands, it seems like they're going to go right over the second apron if Yabusele does not take the mid-level exception, if he takes a little more than that. So it's going to be a challenge for them, but it's a unique challenge they're in right now. But I think it's a challenge that is worth taking because right now, we all know how wide open the Eastern Conference is, so when you add depth and you're shoring up your depth to help your starters out by getting Clarkson and Yabusele, you're looking really good right now. Like, right now, I could argue that top 9, from starting 5 to their bench right now, is the best top 9 in the NBA. I really could argue that. Maybe it might not be the absolute best, but it's definitely one of the best, and I really don't think there's an argument for that. That's really what I want to say about Yabusele, though, but I want to hear what you got to say about that, Ryan, because, like, you know, he brings so much to the table. I think this is a really underrated signing. I feel like with all the NBA news that was going on yesterday, in particular, you know, the Damian Lillard news and all that stuff, the Yabusele signing kind of went under the radar, obviously. But I think it was a really good signing. I think it's going to make the Knicks a lot better than they were before they made that signing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, when you talk about the ability to run deeper rotations, switch up your lineups, all that stuff. It just takes your offense to a new level. Now, are either of these additions going to improve you defensively? No. But what it does open the door for is keeping Mitchell Robinson, which is kind of a huge thing here. Dylan, we had talked about the contract extension and that might push the Knicks to trade him. And while I do believe that's still on the table, they don't have to feel forced to do it. Teams won't feel like the New York Knicks have to trade Mitch or have to just go about losing him, because there's another outcome here. The other outcome in this scenario is that the Knicks just say, hey, we want to go all in to win this year, and if Mitch leaves, Mitch leaves. Sometimes you just lose players for nothing, but you walk away with something very important, and that's a title. You technically don't lose them for nothing. You lose them and you get a title in return. So the Knicks do not have to trade anyone on their current nine-man rotation unless something beautiful opens up for them to get better. That is a position you need to be in. That's the exact spot you need to be in as an organization. We don't feel forced to trade someone, but you feel like you would only trade someone if the opportunity opens up. And that's a huge spot for Leon Rose to be in. This also opens a door, Dylan, and we saw Ian Begley talk about this with Mitchell Robinson and Karl-Anthony Towns as the starters potentially, and having Bouli as depth behind them. I do wonder if that double big man lineup is something that they rotate more. And also, I just like the idea that the front office seems to be in a spot where they want to try out different lineups. They want to try different things. And one last thing I'd like to kind of point out here, and Dylan, I wonder if this is something that's playing a role in all this like newfound depth. Do you think Jordan Clarkson signs with the New York Knicks on a vet minimum deal if Tom Thibodeau is the head coach and he doesn't really know if he's going to play? Do you think
Can't guarantee that
picking the Knicks over the Nuggets? Right? Like having a coach, or you don't have a coach technically, so yeah. But knowing you're probably going to hire someone who's going to play their bench more than Tibbs, I think, is an important part of all of this. And again, we rehash the conversation, and I don't want to sit here and just dog on Tibbs, but his limitations do affect you in more ways than one, and it's not just your ability to win basketball games. Now, again, I look at the New York Knicks and I say, okay, I think Cleveland's very good. I think Orlando's pretty good. I don't think anyone else is on our level. I think we're better than everyone else by a decent margin, and I think you can argue that we're better than both Cleveland and Orlando. I think we are better than Orlando. I think Cleveland, it's tough for me to ignore a 60-win season, and they did lose to the Pacers, a team we did lose to as well. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, well, we got to the Eastern Conference Finals. If we played Indiana, would we have gotten there? If Cleveland played us, what would have happened? We can't really know. But what I will say is I don't think Cleveland's an immovable object like the way I would view an Oklahoma City Thunder last year. I view them more as like a really good team, a challenge, a threat to the Knicks, but not someone the Knicks should be like, oh, we have no chance. Yeah, we shouldn't even play the games.
Right, and like you said, I mean, at the end of the day, it's always about the depth in this situation, because obviously last season the starting five for the Knicks on paper was one of the best starting units in the entire league. And when you look at like Josh Hart, obviously he kind of had he had a weird second half of the year, if you want to put it that way, because he kind of stopped scoring a little bit and it kind of hurt the offense. It seems like, though, as you said, the Knicks are willing to try out different lineups. It seems like they want to be able to see if Josh Hart would be better suited for the bench, and if you could elevate, say, either Clarkson or Yabusele to the starting lineup. Have Mitchell Robinson in the starting lineup and Yabusele be the backup center maybe. They want to try a bunch of different things, and they're giving whoever the new head coach is going to be. It seems like it'll be Mike Brown, but we can't, confirm that right now because it isn't official. But, assuming that it is Mike Brown, it seems like they want to give him a very suitable roster and a deep roster to work with. He was just with Sacramento, who, they relied on depth quite a lot. I mean, those guys, they like to play a lot of their guys. Obviously, there was the weird Keon Ellis situation, but aside from that, he did like to play a lot of his bench guys for a good amount of minutes. So, this is someone who is definitely going to be willing to experiment quite a lot. I feel like he'll be definitely willing to get in his bag a little more, considering he's coaching a team that is arguably a title favorite. I mean, they're arguably the favorite right now to come out of the Eastern Conference in 2025-2026. So, looking ahead with all that stuff, I think the signings that they have made over the past 2 days have been exactly what the Knicks needed to do. They needed to make some depth moves. They didn't need to go out there and make a home run move or anything like that, which theoretically they still could do it. There's still several months left of this offseason. Offseason's not even close to being finished, but I don't think they necessarily have to gut the roster for anybody or anything like that. I think where they're at right now, where they made these depth moves and stuff like that, they're in a good position. I like where they're at. and I'm curious to see what else they do. I'm curious to see if they make any trades to kind of free up some cap space and avoid going over that dreaded second apron, which we all know is kind of becoming a team record now at this point. So whatever ends up happening, ends up happening. But there's going to be a lot of interesting convos to have this summer about that. But before we do wrap the episode up, Ryan, I want to get any more final thoughts out of you, whether the Knicks should, maybe make a trade this summer to kind of free up some cap space, or if you think they should just roll with this roster right now and see what they got.
Yeah, I think the New York Knicks should be in a position where I don't think they need to go out and do much more or anything else at that. Maybe you try and add a couple more flyer guys. You got to round out your roster. You have to roster a certain amount of players. But you kind of look at the outer rim of the roster, right? Like the non-rotation guarantee guys. Tyler Kolek and Ariel Hukporti are important pieces here because one of them is a guard who has shown some playmaking prowess. The other is a center and, has shown a lot of defensive prowess and some offensive upside as well, maybe more than just a complete dud. So I think that the Knicks are in a spot where there is a realistic chance that they have 11 players who can be thrown into rotation at any point in time and they can win games with. That it can play on an NBA team that's trying to win an NBA championship. Now, we'll see what they do in free agency to add someone else. I would love if they could bring back like a DeLon Wright on a veteran minimum contract because he's a good defensive guard. And I think that is going to pair well with the very offensive-minded Tyler Kolek. And, again, that outer rim of your roster, not going to be playing every night for sure, but could play and move up the roster depending on how they develop. You mentioned one key part with additional additions, or you've mentioned this before, the Knicks don't have a lot of space to do a lot. So there was only so much they could do. And I'm honestly, I don't know if you agree with this, I'm kind of shocked with how much they've gotten done in the first few days of free agency. If you told me, hey, Ryan, the Knicks, what are the Knicks going to do in free agency? I'd go, day one, day two, maybe they sign someone to a vet minimum deal, maybe, and maybe it's like someone who's decent enough to be the ninth man on the roster. No, you got someone who could be a sixth man. And then you use your mid-level exception on Gershon Jansbuli. I did not expect this much action. I expected it to be more of a situation where the Knicks were going to have to wait for free agency to kind of die down and for teams to fill up their cap space and for players to get cut or waived or bought out, et cetera, et cetera. They're not just automatically in the buyout market. Look at the Lakers. They're kind of already in the buyout market. Almost immediately. They just lost Dorian Finney-Smith, who, I mentioned as I would love him to be on the Knicks, but he signed for $53 million over 4 years. They weren't going to be able to acquire him. I think that we knew they were going to be limited going into this, so I don't think they need to do much. And I think they've done enough. I think they've done enough that if this was the team on opening night, I'd say, hey, I think they can win the Eastern Conference. I think they will win the Eastern Conference.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think where they're at right now is a really good roster. Yeah, maybe I would like to see a little more veteran minimums, but at the end of the day, I think what they've done right now, I can't really complain about it. They've done exactly almost what I've wanted them to do. They got Jordan Clarkson, a guy who can be a sixth man, and obviously, as you said, Yabusele, who is going to obviously end up being one of the backup centers or power forwards. It's such an upgrade over what we had. I think that needs to be emphasized. It's an upgrade over Cameron Payne. It's an upgrade over Precious Achiuwa. They have legitimate scorers now on the bench, so they should be a much better second unit heading into next season, and that's really what I'm excited about because I'm expecting the starters to all come back, and if that is the case, you've got a good starting five. And now you have a deep bench. So now you have a bunch of different options to go to and a lot more roster flexibility than you did this past season. But I do think this is a good place to finally wrap the episode up. Let us know what you think about both Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele in the comment section below. We would love to hear what you guys got to say about both of those free agents because I do think they are very good signings by the Knicks. You can also follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page that you just watched the video on. You can follow me and Ryan's personal Twitter accounts. They're above our heads. You can also listen to the audio version of this episode on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating on those, and we'll see you guys in the next episode of Fireside Knicks. Peace out, and let's go Knicks.